It was time, really. The reason all of us in the Beatles shied away from Beatles material directly after the breakup.
When people think of Paul McCartney, they think of the charming Beatle with the melodic bass lines and boyish smile. The songwriter who penned Yesterday, the cultural icon who helped revolutionize popular music. But behind the knighthood and cheerful persona lies a man with definite opinions about his musical contemporaries. While Sir Paul has maintained a largely diplomatic public image throughout his career, those close to him have witnessed moments when his polite facade cracked, revealing sharp critiques of bands that didn't meet his exacting standards. Paul can be brutally honest when it comes to music. May come, revealed former Wings guitarist Denny Laine in a rare 2018 interview, there's kind of between me and Paul. It was always that competition, a friendly competition still, you know, can you come up with something or can I? He knows exactly what he likes and what he doesn't and is not afraid to say it behind closed doors. From heated exchanges during the British invasion to dismissive comments about punk rockers who challenged his musical legacy, McCartney's private opinions about certain artists reveal a competitive edge that casual fans rarely glimpse. His musical feuds weren't just about personal differences. They reflected fundamental disagreements about artistic direction, songwriting philosophy, and what rock music should ultimately represent. Today we're counting down the 6 bands that Paul McCartney couldn't stand and why even some of music's biggest names found themselves on the receiving end of the cute Beatles' not-so-cute criticism. Vicious muttered something about establishment sellouts. McCartney turned on his heel and never acknowledged them again. Years later McCartney would grudgingly admit the punk movement had cleared the air in music, but he never warmed to the Sex Pistols specifically. During a 2016 BBC interview, when asked about the band, Paul simply replied, "Not my cup of tea, really," with a tightness in his voice that spoke volumes about his true feelings. 4. Oasis. The Britpop phenomenon of the 1990s saw Oasis emerge as self-proclaimed Beatles disciples, with Noel Gallagher openly worshipping McCartney's songwriting. You might think this admiration would flatter Paul, but behind closed doors it apparently had the opposite effect. Paul found their Beatles obsession tiresome and borderline insulting, revealed McCartney's longtime publicist Jeff Baker. He felt they were reducing his life's work to a handful of copied chords and recycled melodies. What particularly irritated McCartney was Oasis's brash attitude combined with what he perceived as derivative music. During a private dinner in 1997, Paul reportedly told George Martin, "They've got the swagger right, but where's the innovation? We never just copied our heroes, we transformed them." The tension wasn't helped by the Gallagher brothers' notorious outspokenness. When Noel claimed in a 1996 interview that Oasis was bigger than the Beatles, McCartney was furious. According to Beatles biographer Philip Norman, Paul called such comparisons ridiculous and privately dismissed the band as arrogant upstarts with half the talent and twice the ego. A particularly awkward encounter occurred at the 2000 Q Awards when both McCartney and Oasis were receiving honors. Backstage, Liam Gallagher apparently approached Paul for an autograph, only to be met with a surprisingly cool reception. One witness described McCartney as cordial but clearly uncomfortable throughout the exchange. Over the years, Paul has softened his stance somewhat, occasionally acknowledging Oasis's impact on keeping guitar music relevant. However, those in his inner circle maintain he never quite got over what he saw as their shameless plundering of the Beatles' sound. When asked directly about Oasis in a 2018 GQ interview, McCartney offered a tellingly brief response, "Good songs. Wish they'd found their own voice." 3. The Monks. Few bands have drawn McCartney's quiet scorn quite like the Monks. While the world saw them as harmless entertainment, Paul allegedly viewed them as a cynical corporate exploitation of everything the Beatles had pioneered. Paul considered them a plastic imitation, revealed Beatles assistant Alastair Taylor in his memoir. He'd change radio stations whenever their songs came on during car rides to the studio. The Monks' manufactured origins particularly bothered McCartney, who had spent years honing his craft in Hamburg's clubs before achieving fame. During a heated discussion with Brian Epstein in 1967, Paul reportedly said, "They're making a mockery of what we built. For actors pretending to be a band. It's insulting." The tension escalated when the Monks TV show began incorporating psychedelic elements after Sgt. Pepper's release. According to George Harrison, McCartney viewed this as blatant theft. Paul would get properly wound up about it. He'd say, "They're following our blueprint without doing any of the work." A particularly awkward moment came at a Los Angeles party in 1968 when McCartney reportedly snubbed Mickey Dolenz, walking away mid-conversation. Dolenz later recalled, "I don't think he ever accepted us as legitimate musicians." Despite the Monks eventually fighting for creative control and becoming a real band, McCartney's opinion never fully changed. When asked about them in a 2011 interview, his diplomatic response still carried an unmistakable edge. "They had some catchy tunes, but they were certainly no Beatles, were they?" Chikatu, the Bee Gees. The disco explosion of the late 1970s saw the Bee Gees achieve unprecedented success just as McCartney's post-Wings career hit a lull. This timing created what insiders describe as a simmering resentment from Paul toward the Gibb brothers. Paul felt blindsided by disco, recalled producer Chris Thomas. Here were these three brothers suddenly selling more records than the Beatles ever did with Saturday Night Fever, and he took it personally. McCartney's frustration allegedly stemmed from what he saw as the Bee Gees' transformation from Beatles soundalikes to disco superstars. According to Wings guitarist Lawrence Juba, Paul would listen to their falsetto harmonies and mutter about how they'd abandoned their original sound for commercial gain. The rivalry intensified when both acts were recording at the same Miami studio in 1979. Studio manager Tony Bongiovi remembered Paul would schedule his sessions to avoid running into them. When someone mentioned the Bee Gees had broken another chart record, he visibly tensed up. What particularly irked McCartney was the critical acclaim they received. When the Bee Gees were hailed as songwriting geniuses following their disco reinvention, Paul reportedly told his band members, "They're using the same three chords as everyone else. They've just sped them up and added a drum machine." While Paul has never publicly attacked the Bee Gees, his conspicuous omission of them when discussing influential artists speaks volumes. Even during a 2001 tribute following Maurice Gibb's death, McCartney's statement was notably brief and impersonal compared to other artists' heartfelt condolences, suggesting the competitive wounds never fully healed. 1. The Beach Boys. The most intense musical rivalry of Paul McCartney's career wasn't with punk rockers or stadium rock competitors. It was with America's sunshine pop pioneers, the Beach Boys. What began as mutual admiration between McCartney and Brian Wilson evolved into a bitter creative feud that music insiders still discuss decades later. Paul and Brian were like two chess grandmasters, noted legendary producer Phil Spector. Each move one made, the other had to top. It started friendly but turned into an obsession for both of them. The rivalry ignited after McCartney heard Pet Sounds in 1966. According to Beatles producer George Martin, Paul was both inspired and threatened. He played it constantly, analyzing every note. Then he'd say, "We need to go further than this," which directly led to Sgt. Pepper. What truly soured the relationship was the abandoned Smile album. When Wilson shelved his masterpiece amid mental health struggles, McCartney was allegedly dismissive. Beatles roadie Mal Evans recalled Paul saying, "If you can't finish what you start, you shouldn't be in this business. We push through no matter what." The tension peaked during a disastrous 1967 dinner party at Brian Wilson's home. McCartney reportedly criticized several Beach Boys songs as simplistic and suggested their harmonies were predictable. According to Beach Boys drummer Dennis Wilson, Paul left thinking he'd given helpful feedback. Brian didn't speak for days afterward. Over decades, the rivalry morphed into something colder. When asked about the Beach Boys' influence in a 1993 interview, McCartney conspicuously minimized their impact. "They did lovely harmonies, but I think people overstate how much they influenced us. We were already well on our way." Even in recent years, when discussing God Only Knows, a song he's called perfect, McCartney can't resist adding qualifiers like "for American pop music" or "of that period," revealing a competitive edge that time hasn't dulled. As Beach Boys historian David Leaf put it, Paul respects Brian's work, but he'll never fully acknowledge how much it pushed him. That would mean admitting someone else drove the Beatles' evolution. That's our countdown of the 6 bands that got under Paul McCartney's skin. From creative rivalries to personality clashes, even music legends have their musical nemesis. What do you think about these feuds? Did any surprise you? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this musical deep dive, Smash that like button and subscribe for more untold stories from rock history. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our weekly uploads.